Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Trowel Talk Live. We're very pleased to have Claire McCaughey speaking to us today about ornamental edibles. Now, Claire has been a master gardener since 2015. She coordinates our presence at the Ottawa Farmers Market, and you know she has a good eye for design because she is an ikebana artist and is also a very accomplished public speaker and very generous about sharing her ikebana knowledge. So today she's going to be talking to us about ornamental edibles. Please go ahead, Claire.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. And I'm looking forward to talking about some of my favorite ornamental edibles. But before I talk about the ones that I'm going to tell you about, I would like to just explain a little bit about what is an ornamental edible, because it's not a term that you'd walk into a garden center and ask about ornamental edibles. So I've got a few points here that I think are important to understand about ornamental edibles. They're edible plants. They could be perennials or annuals, vegetables, fruits, or herbs. And, they're attractive, they're beautiful, they're interesting, they're striking. There's different ways of describing ornamental, but they all have to do with kind of aesthetic qualities of the vegetables or fruits or herbs. They can be grown in flower beds because they are more ornamental. And so you don't have to relegate them to a kitchen or a vegetable garden. They can be grown anywhere, really. They're just wherever you want to have an interesting plant. Some of you may know the term edimentals, which I believe came originally from Stephen Barstow, if I believe that's correct. He came up with a term, which is really another term to be used for ornamental edibles, particularly perennial ones. And so it's a useful kind of shorthand description. And when you're talking about ornamental qualities of edible plants, you're looking at all aspects of the plant. At any stage that they grow, when they're growing, could be the bud, could be the flower, the fruit, the leaf, the stem, the seed, or even the seed head. So all of the plant parts. Some edibles have characteristics that are very ornamental. So sometimes they've been even selected for that reason. And these seed companies will talk about the ornamental qualities if you're growing them from seed. So that's something to look for as well. So I guess I'm just going to start by asking a quick question about whether a shift in perspective is needed to maybe encourage more people to grow ornamental edibles. I don't think it's so much a shift in perspective. It's maybe just a bit of an expanded perspective because we've always had ornamental edibles, just maybe didn't think of them in those terms. And I was thinking of scarlet runner beans being around for a very long time and grown in the ornamental part of the garden, and also fruit trees. So to start with, I just want to say there are many ornamental edibles, so I had to kind of limit the list here. These are some of the leafy ornamental edibles. They're ones that I particularly like. Some of the photos were taken, the kale on the left and the container with the chard and the cabbages on the right were actually taken at a botanical garden in Tucson, Arizona. And the one in the middle is in my own garden. So these are some of the leafy plants that are often used in botanical gardens, municipal plantings, residential gardens, and certainly a lot of community gardens that you see around Ottawa. So there's lacinato kale, that blue kale is a favorite of mine. Red and green cabbage always look interesting. And Swiss chard I particularly like because of the red stems, and there are also other colors in the stems in the bright lights variety of Swiss chard. The onion family, or the allium family, there are edible onions that resemble a lot the maybe more ornamental cousins. And so they do fit right in with the ornamental garden. They could be, chives is actually my #1 favorite, even though it's supposedly a very common plant. It's like my top favorite plant of all time for so many reasons. And leeks, this is an unusual perennial leek, this one in the middle here that I grew from seed that I got from a kind of a bit of an obscure source, but I'm happy that it survived in the garden, and it just has a very elegant, beautiful stem with a white flower. And on the right is the Japanese bunching onions, Allium fistulosum, which is edible, can be used in, just like any sort of green onion, but is also very ornamental and surprisingly attractive in flower arrangements, believe it or not. I should also mention garlic chives are quite ornamental too, but they do tend to kind of take over in the garden. So they're maybe not in my top list of ornamental edibles. The nightshade family has some really interesting ornamental edibles. Tomatoes, to me, are very ornamental. And there's so many, of course, there's so many varieties and heirloom tomatoes and tomatoes of every color. I've just shown a couple of images here of tomatoes. These ones on the left were in a market in Italy. So they have this kind of unusual shape. So it's not just the color, it's the shape being different than a regular tomato. And this one here was growing in my garden. It's sort of a greenish, green-red mix. I don't remember the actual variety, but it just looked super interesting to me from a color point of view. This one here is called Ethiopian eggplant. It actually looks like a tomato superficially the first time you see it. And it is actually used by flower rangers, believe it or not, because you can buy it at the florist, but it is also an edible plant. And I did, in a quick search on the internet, find plenty of recipes for Ethiopian eggplant dishes. But I grew it especially as an ornamental for myself to use in flower arrangements. And on the right is a beautiful eggplant that called Rosa Bianca. It's an Italian heirloom variety. It just has a beautiful round shape, purple and white color, and just very sweet little eggplant, round shape, and very pretty to look at. The other quality of eggplants, ornamental quality, is they have very beautiful flowers, very pretty purple flowers. You probably noticed that if you already grow eggplants, that the flowers alone are very pretty. There are lots of ornamental fruits that are attractive and interesting and useful. They're either shrubs or ground covers. I'm not going to go into trees, and I'm just going to give 3 examples of plants that I have in my garden that I have had for a few years and seem to have really kind of proved themselves in different ways, although they aren't necessarily all top fruit producers. I just like them for the fact that they do produce a minimal amount of fruit or a lot of fruit in one case and look attractive in the garden. On the very right here that's actually a flower of a ground cover cranberry called Vaccina macrocarpon. The cultivar is called Stevens. It's actually an evergreen ground cover, so it's a fabulous ground cover. And these little white flowers, they're very, very tiny, so they don't look that big when you see them in flower. And I have not got very many cranberries, just like a handful so far, but apparently over time they do start producing a bit more fruit, but it's really a great ground cover. Also a great ground cover are alpine and wild strawberries. Fragaria vesca is the alpine variety, and Fragaria virginiana is the wild strawberry, and they make really great ground covers. The alpine one doesn't have runners, and the wild strawberry has lots of runners. So depending on the space in your garden, and those little strawberries are so very beautiful, intense taste as well. Oh, and the haskaps I had planted a few years ago. And so that's Lonicera cerulea. Those are actually in the honeysuckle family. So they're basically an edible honeysuckle, if you want to look at them that way. But the berries are such a beautiful, beautiful color, this intense blue color. And they're a little on the tart side, but I use them for making all kinds of desserts and in smoothies and stuff like that. And they just look beautiful in the garden. And even before the berries are formed, there's little white flowers. The shrub comes out early in the spring and just is a really valuable presence in the garden. These are some maybe a bit more unusual ornamental edibles that I have grown. So these pictures are all from my garden. I do like to experiment with trying new plants all the time. And so I've tried all of these, and I may well grow them again. I wouldn't say that I've had a huge crop, maybe with the exception of the tomatillo, the plant in the middle. The plant on the left, the red variety of okra, I bought thinking I'd have a nice little crop of okra, which I love as a vegetable. But in the end, it was more of an ornamental, really, but just looked very beautiful. Actually has a flower before this pod is formed. And just that intense red color looked very attractive in the garden. The tomatillo, if you like Mexican food, this is the source of salsa verde. And it's actually related to the Chinese lantern, the Physalis family. As you can see, it kind of has a similar look to it. So for the same reason that Chinese lanterns are interesting, so are the tomatillos. And there's also a purple variety of tomatillos as well. On the right is Amaranthus cruentus, which is amaranth, which is a grain or a pseudo grain, I guess it's called. But it's also been amaranth is the plant that produces the beautiful flowers called love lies bleeding, with these sort of drooping flowers. Look very, very striking and unusual in the garden. And as you can see, they combine very well with, this is a Rudbeckia triloba, the yellow and the red of the amaranth. And here are a couple more unusual ornamental edibles. On the right is golden oregano, which I had grown quite a few years ago and absolutely loved, and then moved house and then didn't have it anymore. And I was able to get another plant, actually from another master gardener. So that was really fun. And I absolutely love the color. It's very, very striking. You could see it from a distance. And it is totally edible in the same way as regular oregano is edible. On the left is actually a photo of a garden, which I discovered thanks to Rebecca recently when I was at the Lansdowne Market. It's really the most lovely garden, which I urge you all to go and visit next time you're at the Lansdowne Farmers Market. It's in the Lansdowne Park, so the garden is behind the Lansdowne Pavilion. And it's a lovely raised bed garden maintained by, I think it's people from the Ottawa Horticultural Society. But the main reason for mentioning this is that they had this huge patch of a plant that I've been wanting to grow for a long time, but only recently started growing, which is a plant called red orach. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but and I've noticed there's some people refer to it as magenta. So I'm not sure if magenta versus red are two different types of orach, but it's a self-seeding annual, and it's really the most delightful plant. And this patch here in the Lansdowne Park garden is a self-seeded patch, and it's just got the most kind of intense red color and looks absolutely lovely. And it gets quite tall, depending on how rich your soil is, of course, and looks very beautiful with light going through it. So very nice and unusual ornamental edible. And then these are a few of my experiments in ornamental edibles. The first one here is a fig tree, which I have in my garden. I rarely seem to get much of a crop, but I just grow it because I love the look of fig trees. And I have had 1 or 2 ripe figs in the last few years. This one here, I think, was one of the years when I had one beautiful, perfect, delicious, incredible fig, because they have 2 crops a year. So unless your tree kind of survives the winter, the old wood, you won't really get a crop that will ripen. But I still love having it in the garden just because it looks beautiful. The leaves are beautiful as well. And I believe they are also edible. In the middle is artichoke plant, which I've also long wanted to grow, but really our season isn't long enough, I think, although I did manage to get this little artichoke flower head going. That was probably a day or so before the squirrels got it. So sadly, I didn't get the actual flower opening and the kind of dramatic look that I wanted, but it was still fun, and I may still try to grow it again, maybe protected by a wire cage. And on the right is Chinese pink celery. Celery also requires a long kind of season to grow, but the seed catalogs sometimes have colors that look way more intense than what they do when you actually grow it yourself. But these do, in fact, have a really nice pink tinge, and the celery flavor was very good. It's just they do require quite a lot of time to get to that size. So when you have vegetables as ornamentals, these 3 pictures were actually taken at the Tucson Botanical Garden because I was most impressed with their kitchen garden and their barrio garden. This one in the middle is their barrio garden in Mexico and Central America. Just these sort of little urban gardens with pots and beautiful little objects and lots of little vegetables. So I was very taken with their presentation of seeing these veggies in little pots and flowers and other objects, and thought that was a lovely way to include some ornamental edibles. And on the left is their, I guess what you call more of a sort of traditional, vegetable garden with this straw mulch and, everything grown properly to have really high quality vegetables. But I must say both the kale is beautiful, and I also think the kohlrabi is beautiful because of the purple color. So it's beautiful to look at because it's beautifully grown in the right conditions. And on the right is a kitchen garden, and it's just got that lovely mixture of primarily leaves, and I think that's something to mention about vegetables as ornamentals. We are talking a lot about mostly leaves, but there's so many interesting colors and shapes and forms and some very tall plants that it's pretty interesting to include them. The couple more slides left. Just organizing your ornamental plants in a kind of interesting, tidy way, actually, I find very satisfying and ornamental. These are my green onions in very tidy little lines, and my little boxes outside my kitchen door for things I want to grab from just outside the kitchen. And on the right here is a little herb garden at the Tucson Botanical Gardens, just with a lovely row of, and I'm not sure what that is. It might be that Centolina. It just looked beautiful with that line of gray. So it's practical and ornamental as well. And another detail that's really nice with ornamental plants is just having them in nice kind of tidy raised beds or little nice edging. And I absolutely love labels. This was taken at the Padua Orto Botanico, and they had these just lovely labels. And I thought it would be so nice to create those for my own garden. And finally, think about the placement of ornamental plants where you can take maximum advantage of things like light. I, by chance, just happened to have my kale in a position where the late afternoon light came through them, and I thought it was a really nice effect. And also, don't hide your ornamental edibles away. You can definitely put them in the foreground. They're pretty enough, beautiful enough to compete with ornamentals. And with that, I will take some questions.
Well done, Claire. You really did a great job. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions for you. We're going to begin with Tula, who has a question about cardoon. So I wasn't sure if you had experience with cardoon, if you'd done it, but anyway, here's her experience. She said she's been growing it for the past 3 years, and she's tried to overwinter her first one indoors, and it died about April the following spring because of fungus gnats. And this spring, she's just put one outside that she overwintered as a house plant, and she really hopes it's going to bloom this year. So she's asking if anybody else has experience with this, and in particularly, Claire, do you have experience with this?
Well, I have tried to grow cardoon, and I do love how it looks. It's such a kind of architectural plant, and those beautiful sort of gray serrated leaves. I did try to grow it last year, and a couple of the plants just didn't thrive for some reason. I had them in a sunny location. So in theory, I did everything correctly, I think, but I would love to actually learn from other people who maybe have had success. I mean, they won't have that flower, or they get to a sufficient height until the second year. So the strategy would be to winter them over, but I haven't tried that. I have just tried the first year and just didn't have the plants thriving, but I'd love to hear if anyone else has had success.
Okay, thank you. Here's a second question from Dawn. Is there any good edible ornamental for dry and or shady areas?
Well, a lot of the kind of leafy vegetables will do well in shadier spots, but you may need to water the leafy vegetables because they do like a fair amount of water to kind of maintain their lusciousness. It's surprising sometimes what does grow quite well in shady, dry locations. I mean, some of the little the woodland or wild strawberries actually did quite well for me in dry, shady locations. So those I would recommend. They're not really a vegetable, but they are an ornamental edible. But if a dry shade, if you want to eat them, you would probably need to supplement, the water, so that they grow to a good, decent size and healthy plant.
Yeah, here's an additional comment from Rebecca, actually. She says that fiddlehead ferns would be a good choice it would be more like a perennial edible for dry shade. So we have a couple more questions if you're ready. So what's a source of recipes for you for using ornamental edibles? Like, do you have any book you'd like to recommend, or is there a particular site that you've seen that's a good source?
Well, I do I have come across, I think most of you may have heard of Fine Gardening magazine, which issued a sort of supplementary set of magazines with both the instructions for growing ornamental or just any edibles, but a lot of them were ornamental as well, and included recipes so that you could sort of combine the whole experience of growing and then eating them. So I really like that concept. because sometimes when you search for things, you find either how to grow the plant or how to eat the plant. It's hard to find the integrated information. I know that Stephen Barstow, Rebecca was mentioning to me that he has an interesting book about the Ornamentals that was mentioning at the beginning. I mean, maybe some ideas about how these are used in terms of eating. And there's a site called The Spruce that does have somewhat of an integrated approach to, here's a bit about how you grow, as well as how you eat. So I would kind of think if you can get a site which includes both of those elements, you're a bit further ahead, because I don't think you can separate them as easily as all that. I think it's nice to have those two things together.
Yes. Here's an additional question for you. So is there a health risk? Somebody's asking if there's a health risk eating plant material that was just purchased from a garden center and that you just installed in your garden. Like, is there a health risk, you think, in picking maybe the flowers for eating, or what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's sort of like some common sense rules with anything you're going to eat. I mean, I personally would tend to eat organic, say lettuce or kale. But even if it isn't organic, or if it is, whether it is or isn't, obviously washing the leaves very thoroughly is very important. Same thing with any fruit or herb. If you're buying a fruit bush, I think, once you've had a crop in it, I would say you're pretty safe with the next crop to eat from the bush, even if it's sort of within your ornamental garden. So I think, yeah, common sense about sort of not contaminating your plants and keeping them clean and washing the fruits or leaves, as the case may be.
Very good, very good. So I am just one more comment here. It's like a personal comment. I just want to say I really admire your experiments. How you've tried like the figs, the artichokes, okra, even. So those are admirable that you've done this, and it's good. It's good. So that's all the questions we have. Oh, and hang on, there's one more question from Sandra. This one is: are there concerns eating lettuce or kale where you have put mushroom compost around it?
I actually don't use mushroom compost very much at all. I mean, not because I have anything against it. So I can't really answer that one. Somebody else might maybe be better to answer that. I tend to just use compost from my composter for in my vegetable garden. Yeah, I'm not actually 100% sure what is in mushroom compost, so I wouldn't want to recommend for or against without doing a bit more research. So sorry, I can't provide a direct answer on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. You've given us all kinds of exciting ideas, and as Odette mentioned, lots of interesting challenges to try in terms of new plants that we might want to add to our garden maybe next season. And you've given us a feast not only for the eyes, but also for the palate. So wonderful talk. Thank you very much indeed. And next week, of course, we will have Andrea Knight talking to us about big ideas for small gardens. That sounds like one I should listen in on. I have a small garden and I'm always trying to fit more stuff into it. Thank you again, Claire.